How's that?
Perfect.
That's great. So the modern tech stack, the first thing we're going to talk about is what's changed. A lot has changed. And first of all, the modern office has really changed. We've chatted about this before in the past, but it really is important for us today because the modern office is the modern tech stack. That's one, I think, fascinating change that's happened because of the pandemic and because of technology is the modern office is the modern tech stack. We've seen this before, but the modern office was shrinking before COVID, which is astounding. And then, of course, what happened afterwards was that before 2020, 3% of the labor force was working from home. Now it's 42%. What's astonishing is that these are going to happen, keep continuing for some time. We're seeing more and more companies that are choosing the hybrid model. We all know that. We've seen that. But what's fascinating about this is what's changed with B2B buying and selling. And I think all of these things are important because when we talk about the modern tech stack, we have three different big parts of our equation. We have our operations and our teams and our projects, and then we have our client facing, which is becoming far more important digitally speaking. And then we have supply chain and our supplier partners. But what's changed with B2B buying and selling is fascinating because this is important for our tech stack. And that is that what our folks are calling the B2B inflection point, that 80% of sales interactions will happen through digital channels by 2025. That doesn't mean a shopping cart. What that means is more and more of our interactions are going to happen in digital channels. For example, I think the day of yesterday will be that we are spending so much of our time talking with customers, putting out fires, talking about projects in play, in-hand dates, missed shipments, things like that. That's the power that your technology should be doing for you and freeing you up to do more proactive work, which we'll get to in a minute. The fascinating thing that has happened with B2B buyers over the past year is that they see that digital interaction has been 2 to 3 times more important than traditional interactions. B2B buying behavior also has changed in that sales reps are a channel to the customer, not the channel. Catherine, something you and I have talked about a lot, and that is that the democratization of the sales team. How more and more of your team, which requires integration, which we'll get to in a minute, more and more of your team is working with more and more of your clients. And it's no longer just that one siloed relationship. But sales reps are a channel, not the channel. And this is also a big change. Sales and marketing must operate in parallel, not in serial fashion, in parallel with it. Also, what we have found out through research is that remote engagement successfully supports both sides of selling and prospecting with customers. In fact, if you'll look at the 2 arrows that I have in this slide, the trend, when you look at a report that showed thousands of B2B buyers, what was more effective in person or digital, then, or what the question was, are digital interactions really effective? You'll see that they were the same or they were more effective, but look what's growing and look what's shrinking. What's growing is that these digital interactions are becoming more and more commonplace. More and more buyers are preferring to have quick interactions or consultative interactions with you digitally. And then what's really astonishing to me are the new customer channel, because new customers, 76% of new customers are acquired through these channels. So I kind of bring this up because this affects everything moving forward. We are a sales business. We work in a sales organization, and we have to understand the rhythm of what's happening in the B2B buyer landscape. We know this, but customers are requiring 4 things from us moving forward, 4 more things, which our technology should enable us to do: interact with our team and interact with them, research and inquiry into their business. This is what they want. Right now, a lot of us are still stuck in a mode of being solely sourcing houses in the eyes of our clients. What they really want is consultative selling, research and inquiry. They want empathy and foresight. They want omni-channel fluency, which we're talking about through this whole presentation, and leadership from us. Here's what's interesting from Chief Martech. Roberto Wong said this about your tech stack in terms of what your clients want, that your tech stack should help you tackle your current and your future problems. Given the complexity of the marketing stack, make sure your problem definition is solid. So I'm pointing this slide out because I'm showing the 4 things according to Harvard Business Review that our clients want from us in the future, and that these are the things that are often not analyzed when we're looking at our modern tech stack. Is our tech stack facilitating these types of things? Also, what's changed is the tech investments. What's astonishing is that we're learning that the organizations that experimented with new digital technologies during the crisis or now, or those that accelerate it now, or those that invested more resources in digital technology than their peers did, according to McKinsey, they're twice as likely to yield outsized revenue growth than other companies. This is probably no surprise to everyone showing up today because of how much technology powers. What I love, this is a very maybe commonplace statement, but I love the emphasis of it. Many of us have great teams. We have a lot of folks in place. But what Colin Reed with Gartner said is that if you do have great astronauts, build 4 rocket ships and you'll build a massive competitive advantage. It's an oversimplification, but I think it's well taken that we often have put such a strong emphasis on our teams, which is vitally important. And now we're seeing that technology is becoming as important to integrate our entire teams. 4 simple steps, and then we're going to get to our interview real quick to creating a modern tech stack. Number 1, this is according to Gartner research done through many buyers of modern technology buyers. Audit your existing systems. That's the first step. Everybody gets that. I think it's kind of simple. The second step is the one that surprised me that was in here, but didn't surprise me because of who we are, and that is to accelerate the cadence of your planning. This is probably the one area where we get, so whatever we talk about today, if as we're analyzing things, if it's your marketing that's weaker, if it's your accounting side, if it's your ops, supply chain, whatever it might be, keep this in mind, because the agile companies are the ones that made the decisions quicker. Typically, a lot of folks hover in this area way too long. And the way business is moving and accelerating and coming back, you don't have that time. So accelerate the cadence of your planning and be agile. And number 3, of course, senior decision makers, not because of their authoritarian status, but because they are involved in multiple things and they can see the business holistically. And number 4, of course, think integrated. That's going to be a key theme as we move forward as well. And as you and your team, your clients move forward, is thinking integrated. So ask yourself, what current problems do you want to solve with your modern tech stack? And then what future problems do you want your tech stack to solve? We've all probably seen this ad infinitum, but it's the Chief Martech marketing technology landscape. There you go. There's all the apps available to you today that to power your business. It's absolutely overwhelming. The good news for us, and this is not just a commonsku plug, what I'm trying to say is that really you can simplify everything that we do down into a few key categories, which Catherine and I will get to in a minute. The thing I want to leave with you before we get into the interview is, what is the next normal? McKinsey talks about this. We talked about the new normal all through the pandemic. What is the next normal? The next normal is going to be all about integrated systems. And I love this phrase that they have in this quote. It's taking technology out of quarantine. So getting these different siloed pieces that we have of our business out of quarantine and back into an integrated system. What I think is powerful is that when we talk about integration as an important part of your modern tech stack, is that this is what the clients are wanting, and your team, going back to the democratization of Salesforce, it's vitally important that they work and live in an integrated ecosystem because of working from home, because of working at the office, and because of that democratization. So that's it. That's just a really brief overview of kind of what we wanted to talk about today. But Catherine, what I wanted to ask you was, let's start with where the economy is now. I mean, the economy's roaring back. We're all starting to feel that now. We can see that the pent up demand and spend is really affecting inventory models. We know the supply chain woes that everyone's having. How does a more modernized tech stack mitigate or eliminate this kind of struggle?
Speed and agility are just so critical right now. I mean, you look at what a challenge it is getting orders in from a perspective of inventory and things moving constantly. And I think that ability to be able to iterate quickly with the client to get them to a decision, and then ultimately to be able to get an order in quickly, with the supplier, is just going to make things so much smoother, because the time frame between, from presenting a product to the client and ultimately getting that, pulled off the warehouse shelves, can sometimes be really long. And thinking about how do you compress that entire process as much as possible so that you don't end up in these crazy situations of inventory disappearing and having to go back and, start from the very beginning again.
Well, and it's also aggravating as someone we both manage teams and distributorships, and it's aggravating knowing you have these highly talented, high caliber people doing some fairly mundane tasks around right. And right now that pain is so obvious, everybody here knows it, right? Because of the supply chain woes. When the supply chain woes start to increase, that's when you're really aware that you've got top talent doing kind of work that they don't want to do.
Yeah, and you
or
look at
that,
something as simple as at the very beginning of the process, and that if you've got teams, copying and pasting images and pricing into PowerPoint as an example, and having to, individually go and look up inventory across many, many different websites for suppliers in order to be able to ensure that what they're presenting is actually feasible, that the amount of time that it takes just to prepare that piece of it,
yeah.
let alone to progress kind of through to the client, signing off and moving forward, that there's so much more risk introduced into all of those things if you've got the sales team spending time on that versus being able to turn orders kind of in a nimble, agile way.
Yeah. I found this great statement from McKinsey through one of their research studies, in that they said that corporate growth strategies and digital strategies are now the same. I know you agree with that statement, but why? Why are those now the same?
I mean, I think if you're not weaving digital into every single element of how you're thinking about your business, you're missing out on a huge opportunity. And I think this industry as a whole has been slow to adopt. And I think we got dragged into the internet age kicking and screaming because of what that did to the industry overall, and the transparency that it wrought, and all the challenges with that. But ultimately, in terms of how it is that you translate kind of that into the tools that your team's using kind of every single day, like that should be baked into the entire strategy kind of your business, from moment one now.
Yeah. Let's drill down into a few key buckets. When we talk about the modern tech stack, we kind of have 5 primary areas. What are the most important parts for us? And speaking from a growth perspective. So as we're getting into this part of the discussion, what I want us to all be thinking about is growth. I think given the supply chain woes, we get stuck in, I just need to resolve these problems right now, which we do in order for us to unleash our team to be able to grow. But there are these 5 buckets in our industry that are typically around marketing, sales, orders, accounting, and comms. Did I miss one? Marketing, sales, orders, accounting, comms. That's pretty much it.
Comms being communications, just to
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, what are the most important parts in terms of what are you seeing that has changed in each of these buckets? Let's start with marketing.
Just to speak kind of more broadly for a minute, I think that one of the things that's been interesting to watch as far as just the evolution within the industry is that there was a very surprisingly high tolerance for complete lack of integration up until kind of more recently. So having everything operate in different silos across all those different buckets across the organization, and the fact that that was just accepted as being normal, I think it to me is the most interesting part of it. Is, well, that's just the way we do things, and so there isn't kind of a questioning around what the other options are, kind of for making things more seamless, or just keeping up with kind of the incredible change that has been happening within the tech space, kind of overall, and just the ability to have things communicate a lot more seamlessly. So I think that that's just kind of fundamentally a challenge that as an industry kind of we have faced over the years. But I think that the piece, and speaking to marketing specifically, is that the marketing in a lot of ways has been an afterthought in this business because because not enough distributors kind of focus on creating themselves as a unique identity kind of unto themselves as a brand, and really kind of putting that out there kind of with clients, and not kind of hiding behind the fact that being a distributor. So ultimately, I think that owning kind of more of a seat at the table from a marketing perspective is something that distributors are realizing is incredibly important. But the way that kind of translates into just the relationship to the overall buckets is that is often the first experience that a prospect or a client kind of has with you is your marketing. So whether that's your website, whether it's emails that they're receiving, any kind of touch points that are happening, and if that is a completely disjointed brand experience from every other way that you are interacting with them across all those other touch points, all the way through kind of to the final invoice with them, that is just a missed opportunity as far as how it is that you kind of create a delightful and consistent experience. So the ability to be able to tie kind of marketing platforms. So, we have integrations with HubSpot and MailChimp as examples, that the ability to tie that in and to your systems kind of overall, and be able to create kind of a consistent brand experience, to be able to create more personalization based on, the way that you have your client record stored in your CRM, and how that enables you to cater to different, industries, different departments, different functions, and how you're communicating to clients, that there's so much opportunity available with that now.
Yeah. Going back to your integration comment, of course, that one of the things that I presented in the presentation was that sales is a channel, not the channel, but a channel, and marketing is becoming, like you said, the primary place where folks first experience your brand. But something that I've seen change with marketing is there used to be a slow adoption of CRM type tools in the industry, very slow. In fact, we must have gone through literally four or five different types of platforms. What I look back now, hindsight's always 20/20, but I look back now and I realize what's happened is that we were wanting to get there as an organization, but honestly, even the market themselves hadn't caught up. But here's, I think, the change that's happening in the dynamic between why CRM adoption, HubSpot and MailChimp, and just connecting all these is important now, is because that democratization of the sales team, on one hand, that we keep talking about, having more people involved in interacting with the client and their projects, but also the complexity of the client projects. I mean, last year, what happened in terms of the average project, and that we were suddenly kidding a lot and we were doing more things that required more people on the team to be involved, meant that we had to have these integrations.
Yeah, and that ties into communications for sure. But I think that the issue with CRM is that historically it has been viewed as you've had to adopt a standalone application where salespeople felt as if they were going in and logging clients, logging interactions, going in and basically capturing data for the sake of capturing data to make management happy. And no salesperson ever wants to do anything like that because it takes away time from selling. And so the perception of that being a value add to them was pretty low, kind of on the totem pole. So I think that where things have changed in that regard is that when CRM is fully integrated into the entire workflow of everything else you are doing with that client around kind of managing projects and how that carries through all the way through the order process, that it's not viewed as a make work project. It's just, the beginning stages of what's involved, prior to, a presentation or an order happening. And so when it's baked into the workflow, there's no kind of feeling as if it's make work. Like it's just, it's valuable time spent, because ultimately you're creating kind of clean records. And if you then layer on top, additional time of segmenting or tagging or statusing or other kind of ways of being able to create differentiated views of the customer base, then that ultimately feeds into so much more intelligence in terms of guiding salespeople how to spend their time, in terms of being able to give them better insights into their client portfolio, and just help them be so much more strategic.
Yeah, and it creates a communal intelligence in the sense that you could work from anywhere. Team members may come and go, but you've got the super intelligence, the brain of working with that client somewhere and not walking out your door. It's right there in the system.
100%. The history, even just something as basic as someone being on vacation that anyone else can pick up, where that person left off with that client, and ultimately whatever you're putting into the CRM in terms of that customer data and that segmentation information is what is ultimately feeding marketing automation. So the power of being able to give that detailed information that your marketing team or person, or even if it's you as the owner, can leverage to be able to create kind of customized campaigns, that is where you can get kind of the flywheel going around marketing being able to help create opportunities for sales, so that sales isn't having to work so hard around cold calling or prospecting, that there's opportunities kind of being created in the background through the data that they're entering in the CRM that ultimately feeds to marketing automation.
Yeah. How do you see the sales part of the tech stack, the sales bucket, changing going forward, knowing how much our client is changing as well? How do you see that changing with the modern tech stack?
So there's going back to the comment I made earlier around the shocking tolerance that people have had in the industry for maintaining information, rekeying information through multiple systems. That I think that ultimately really kind of comes to the fore right now around the creation of product data and orders and that whole process. So if you look at how it is that has traditionally happened, whether using ESP or Sage or Distributor Central, any of the great industry search tools that are available to find product data to begin with, that then the process around kind of getting that order configured with decoration information and setup information and what are the available options in terms of imprints and all the rest, that all of that is just far more difficult than it should be. And this is where kind of having, integrated systems is going to be, or is currently, and is going to continue to be, just a game changer around the speed with which sales teams are able to operate, and what that translates to in terms of accuracy, both for the client, in terms of ensuring that you're not presenting an option to them that's not possible to do, either as far as, at the most basic level inventory, or at the next level around a decoration option or method. So it's being able to configure that information kind of directly in real time from the supplier data with your own pricing kind of baked in, inventory right in front of you, that being able to have all that information kind of at your fingertips to be able to quickly put together pricing and be able to move that order through kind of once the client signs off. That the difference between that versus someone who is copying and pasting and rekeying, like you're gonna, the person who has everything at their fingertips is going to eat the lunch of the person who is having to copy and rekey and do all that non-value add activity.
Right. And we already know, speaking of this bucket, we're already in at the next bucket in terms of orders, that orders are the nucleus of our business, right? They're so complex. There's so many orders. There's so many suppliers. We know that that's the powerful hub, I think, of our industry. And so for distributors, I don't know how many folks know it, but the majority of mistakes that are actually created between us and the supplier are done by our hand as a distributor.
66% of purchase orders get submitted with missing information or incorrect information.
That's right.
Shocking.
And honestly, no surprise given that. And wow, when you add the complexity last year, when you add the complexity of packaging and kitting and special requirements, we just had our sustainability summit, and there were folks that were suggesting, special instructions around kitting, packaging now, and things like that. So I think the world is getting more complicated in that sense. And that's also a reason why we need to shore this up.
Yeah. And I think you're being, gracious in terms of saying that, kitting was the thing that introduced the challenges. There were a lot of problems long before that in terms of the errors that were going. And I think that the key kind of challenge around that. So think about the implication as far as submitting a purchase order that has either, incorrect information or missing information, that goes into a separate pile on that order entry person's desk. And they then send an email or reach out to the distributor to try and clarify, what the missing information is. And that is time that inventory could be sold to somebody else while your order is sitting in a pile on that order entry person's desk, versus being able to submit that order digitally directly into the supplier's ERP, configured from their data, right into their systems, inventory getting matched kind of right away. And that, even if that translates into 1-2 days, in this kind of time, like this experience that we're in right now, as far as the supply chain challenges, that's the difference between kind of landing that order or not.
Yeah. Right. How do you think the accounting part of this has changed much? And if so, how?
So all of those pieces in terms of from translating that purchase order or the 66% kind of that's going in incorrectly, all of that just trickles down to accounting. So it means that you've created the order wrong to begin with, and therefore kind of with potentially wrong pricing to the client, that ultimately has implications in terms of either you're eating margin because of that, or you're having to go back to the client with mud on your face of having to negotiate a different price, which is never a good look. But ultimately kind of that's got potential accounting errors on both sides, right? In terms of both the client invoice and the supplier bill. And this is where kind of, with the overall with integrations, that being able to have, if you're configuring kind of the data correctly to begin with, the likelihood of creating those pricing errors at the upfront stage is dramatically reduced. And how that ultimately kind of trickles down to accounting is has all the implications kind of that, in terms of being able to have accurate information handoff and just far fewer touches at that stage. So you're invoicing the customer faster, you get the receivable clock counting faster, and ultimately there's no friction kind of when the invoice is coming in from the supplier, that you're not dealing with having to go back for a credit memo or having to go back to the salesperson and question kind of, why is this wrong?
Yeah, we also tend to forget how frustrating it is for customers at that phase in terms of accounting to get that wrong. And folks get, from my experience, folks get really frustrated at the accounting part. I mean, this project gets past them, they've got a million fires to put out, and suddenly there's a problem with accounting, and your buyer doesn't want a problem with accounting. Plus, you and I would be very rich if we had $1 for every time a member of our accounting team walked through our door with a frown on their face and some,
But this is where I think the communication piece kind of comes in. in. And that's super interesting, both in terms of, how it is that information flows, both within your own organization and with the client and with the supplier, on the other end. But think about kind of for your client, there are multiple different people in their organization that are typically interacting on an order. And once things get to their accounting team on the client side, you want it to be perfect and you want to just get it just to be paid. And so we, introduced project portals, years ago within commonsku to be able to have kind of, all that information flow visible to the client and to be able to have kind of communication centralized in one place. And similarly within the internal team, that within the distributor, you've got all these handoffs often happening. You might have an outside salesperson handing off to an inside coordinator who's working on the order, handing off to production, handing off to accounting. There's a lot of potential areas kind of where it is that communication can fall between the cracks on that. And if you're relying on email or ways of hoping that they are sticky note on file folders, which I've seen far too many times in many distributor offices that I have been in, that the file folder getting passed kind of from desk to desk, which obviously that blew up during COVID times when everyone had to work remote and you had to figure out some alternatives around that. But ultimately, just that ability to be able to seamlessly manage the communication flow just means that you're going to create so much better experience for the client. And you're going to take so much load kind of off your team internally, so they aren't spending time kind of running around trying to figure out what happened on an order.
Yeah. We've talked about it some here, but you have been talking about connected workflow for some time. And what was kind of, refreshing for me to see is that this isn't just a commonsku conversation, that the market is having this conversation. And just like the studies that I showed there earlier, is the integration actually going to be a key in terms of the next normal. What's changed in terms of integration? Well, and it's obviously accelerated, but what are you seeing in terms of the demand for integrated systems?
So, the demand is simply because people are sick and tired of rekeying information into multiple different places. So with the recognition that shouldn't be the way we're doing things anymore.
And they're fragmented now, right? They're fragmented. Their locales are fragmented. Their teams are fragmented, but go ahead.
Yeah, and where I think the things have really started to pick up speed in the past, I would say 5 to 10 years, is just the interoperability that is now possible between systems, and whether that's through APIs or common kind of languages that enable different systems to speak to one another. So promo standards is a fantastic example of this. You look at the many disparate systems that our suppliers operate on, and the incredible complexity of all the different products that they are managing within their manufacturing process, and ultimately how you translate that into a common language that enables kind of other systems to consume it. That has been something that has just bedeviled this industry for well north of a decade, and far longer than that in terms of trying to figure out solutions around this. And I think that where kind of technology has come, during this time frame with web services and the ability to be able to have systems communicate in a way that's far more seamless, that we're entering a totally different phase, and that just accelerates everything in terms of the ability to be able to tie pieces together and to just create these seamless tools that enable all of us to work so much more efficiently.
Shifting to the client a little bit, in terms of their engagement with us, we are seeing from the study that I showed earlier about their need for wanting more and more digital engagement. What are you seeing happening? What's changing with the modern tech stack now in terms of client engagement? Maybe to ask it more specifically, what are some of the things and tasks that we're doing with clients that maybe were analog that are getting more digital now?
So there's no question, this was something that was accelerating kind of prior to COVID, and COVID just like blew it up in terms of, what it is that the clients were expecting. Amazon obviously, set kind of a level as far as just, visibility into what was going on with an order, being able to, shop online, all the things that kind of came along with that in the consumer world that people were expecting. And then COVID took that to a whole other level, because it then translated into every area, to groceries, to, anything kind of that you were having to order to home when you weren't able to go in stores anymore. And so just this expectation in terms of ease, I think is a big part of that, as far as being able to have, information at your fingertips, being able to order, being able to have visibility, all of those pieces. And that's now just table stakes in terms of what it is that kind of clients are expecting. And I think that, that's a huge reason why commonsku shops have taken off kind of during this time period, because it's putting the kind of power in the hands of the customer to be able to look through things, to buy, to execute an order, to see what's happening kind of with an order, that, all of those pieces are just empowering the client to be able to make decisions. But just to differentiate that, that's been in place in this industry for some time with like 4imprint and players like that. And I think kind of the key distinction around, what it is that clients are expecting in terms of that overall digital interaction, they don't necessarily want to go and sort through 1,000 pens to find kind of what it is they're looking for. Those clients that kind of want a sophisticated agency style partner who can help them navigate through kind of what they want to achieve in terms of their business objectives and select products with them and be able to kind of work as a partner, that ultimately they just want a digital way to be able to facilitate that experience. And I think that we as an industry have historically made that difficult by, sending PowerPoints, by having things live in email, by making it hard kind of for the client. And there's no excuse for that anymore. There's just so many amazing tools available to make it easy that we need to get on board.
We talked about CRM a little bit, and we talked about it mainly from a team standpoint of managing that and securing that client and the intelligence that lives in that. But talking about CRM and marketing, because we're still speaking on client side and how that affects the marketing, the tech stack. How is the new CRM and marketing affecting and fueling client growth?
I mean, so when you think about just the ability to nudge, to nudge behavior and to keep top of mind, to be able to get in front of the client at the right moment with the right idea. And, it could be as simple as kind of being able to tailor marketing communications kind of to a client based on, you think about kind of, if you have someone who is in an HR role at a tech company, what it is that they care about seeing in terms of ideas and the problems they're trying to solve are entirely different than someone who works in like marketing for a construction company. So if you're sending those people the same thing, then your ability to kind of capture that opportunity is missed. Like that, you're just kind of hoping that you're just able to capture kind of something, seasonal or whatever else that might kind of hit both sides. But if you think about the ability to speak specifically to that audience, kind of based on how it is that you've segmented them in your CRM, like that is what accelerates sales. You can get the right idea in front of them at the right time based on what you know kind of about that industry, about that client segment, and have them put their hand up and say, yes, please. That is one heck of a lot easier than having to constantly try and chase for, a meeting or a call or anything to be able to try and kind of pitch them.
Yeah. And the client has such a low tolerance for untargeted email, untargeted marketing messages, untargeted
flyer
anything.
crap.
Yeah. It's been the bane of our industry for a long time. And the client just doesn't have a tolerance for it anymore. Not when we have so many sophisticated tools at our fingertips. And the fact that those things accelerate sales. So I think we're reluctant to sometimes adopt those things because they can take some time, but every sale worth its merit takes a little time,
I think that where that comes into play in terms of how it is that you get those ideas out. That I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting kind of pushing product. Like part of there's time and place for that as far as what it is that you send to a client. But where there is so much more power kind of in that type of opportunity is sending them a case study or a testimonial or something that ultimately kind of plants an idea in their mind of a way that they can be using merchandise that they never thought of before. And that kind of is not only landing a potential budget that may have already existed, but it's also potentially expanding the pie in terms of getting them to think about spending on product where they might have done that spend on whatever else, an event or a venue or, AdWords, like somewhere else where that budget was being directed. But because you showed them an idea that they hadn't thought of before, that kind of has the potential to create kind of a brand new opportunity.
Yeah. And everybody gets this example, but to simplify that even further still, the HR person would be getting targeted messages around kits for folks coming back into the office, where the sales team might be revamping their sales efforts because they're heading into the next normal and things like that. So that's where that's where that research, going back to what they expect from us now as salespeople. Shifting a little bit to visibility, because we haven't really talked about this. What powers of visibility are now a requirement for the modern tech stack?
So I think that the move to remote probably threw a lot of people for a loop around, how it is that you manage kind of communication and visibility. And, those that didn't have kind of, mechanisms baked into the way that their companies operated before that were definitely forced to find kind of solutions quickly. And I think that there's almost risk in a way, as many people are back in their offices, already for a long time now. But there's kind of risk in just going back to the way things were always done.
Yeah.
And I think that, looking at how it is that you create efficiency kind of by being able to have information reside kind of where it needs to be accessed, especially when there's multiple people, that there's just way too much stuff buried in email right now, both with the client as well as with the supplier, and obviously kind of internal to the organization as well throughout the entire process, kind of from prospect through to, to invoicing. And how to kind of bring that together, in one place so that you have that history kind of at the client level, the history at the project level, that all that information is available at the fingertips of whoever needs it. And that's kind of the most basic element of it. But then I think elevate that in terms of how it is that you then think about communication more broadly. That how do you look at kind of the ways in which you can be more leveraging that to be more strategic, kind of whether that's with marketing, whether that's how it is that you are looking at management, like sales management as an example. That there's just so much information that you can be leveraging if it's available to you kind of in one place, not scattered across, many different systems or buried in email.
Yeah. And if we learned anything last year, and this has always been a hallmark of a brilliant company, of a good company, agility has always been a key. We learned that last year about being agile. You can't be agile if you're walking in the dark. You don't really know. And all this comment may sound real self-serving, but to be able to see what's going on in your business, no matter where you're at, whatever's going on is vital, because the speed of business now is faster than I have ever seen in my career.
Yeah, and ultimately, how that can translate into things like troubleshooting. So if you've got visibility, as an owner or a manager, of your team, if you've got visibility into what they're working on, and you can help see kind of further down in terms of, anticipating where they might run into challenges, that the more you know about what they're working on and who they're working with, or being able to, help facilitate an introduction, like all of those things kind of translate again to acceleration of sales. And especially if your team's continuing to work remote, and with the overall kind of, talent wars going on, that I think companies are remiss to not be thinking long-term remote opportunities around being able to hire talent anywhere. That how do you kind of create that visibility to be able to have insight into what it is the team is working on an ongoing basis, so that ultimately you can be more strategic.
I have one final question for Catherine, but I wanted to remind folks that to throw in your question in the chat if you have one for Catherine. We'd love to hear from you if you have a question. My last question is about reimagining our future going forward. How do you reimagine or rethink the distributor, how they do business, and how they work with their client in the future?
So if you look at a pure kind of basic math exercise, as far as how much time a distributor salesperson has historically spent on kind of non-value add activity, and you were to be able to take even a portion of that and allocate it to more strategic time, what is the impact that can translate to in terms of both customer growth and prospecting growth, overall kind of industry growth? That if a salesperson had more time to be able to research a client, research an industry, stay on top of what's going on, come up with proactive ideas, capture case studies, all those things that ultimately translate into how it is that you work at a whole other level kind of with the client, versus spending time cutting, pasting, rekeying into multiple systems, calling and following up for, what's going on with an order or a tracking ID. Like, none of those things are necessary anymore. And if you can structure your tech stack in such a way where everything talks to each other, and you've got kind of data flowing seamlessly between all the different touch points, from marketing through to CRM, through to sales, order management, invoicing, payments, kind of, all those pieces, that ultimately that frees up that time to be able to spend kind of on more strategic interactions with the client. And that is what ultimately is going to kind of keep us in business, as an industry, and ultimately help us grow and steal market share from other mediums.
Yeah, on our old P&L, we had our ops costs and our sales costs in terms of payroll. And the one big change that I could see happening in the future, and that it should be happening now, is that probably 80% of our payroll costs were attributed around orders in play, that things that had already been sold, and managing the problems or challenges around that. And you look at that and you realize, wow, if we could flip that, and we got 30% of our team is focused on that and 70% is focused on sales, that's going to dramatically change the
And
future
it's
and
also, I
trajectory
mean,
of our business.
looking at the overall kind of, just P&L allocation, like we as an industry have historically massively underinvested in technology.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
just, what our expectations are in terms of what
Right.
percentage, of our revenue we should be spending
Yeah.
on technology is ridiculously low, and viewing it
Yeah.
as an expense as opposed to
Yeah.
viewing it as an enablement. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of the key difference in terms of thinking, whether it's a marketing platform, whether it's a workflow platform, that what is it that can do to be able to help grow your business, grow your margin, ways in which that can allow you to accelerate without adding more payroll cost. And that is exponential in terms of ultimately its ability to kind of translate into to that top line growth and that bottom line growth.
Yeah.
And I think that viewing that differently, as opposed to viewing it as an expense, viewing it as enablement, I think it's just so critical.
Yeah. A question from Nettie Sparkman, who said, when a company's just starting the
Hi,
process of
Nettie.
modernizing their tech stack, what would be the one piece of advice you would give them as they navigate the process?
I think that a lot of it starts with understanding kind of information flow. What is it that you need to kind of speak to each other within different systems, and what is actually truly valuable. I think that often we can start with like the trying to achieve 100% perfection, and that's just never possible within any kind of systems integration.
Right.
So just in looking at kind of what is going to have the highest impact at each step along, if you think about that, the buckets that we've been talking about, in each step kind of along the way, that how can you kind of aim for the highest impact pieces and be able to focus on those first, and ultimately realize that it's a journey in time as far as how it is. Changing systems is always it can be difficult, and so kind of ensuring that you're going after the things that are going to have the highest impact first, and kind of having a timeline around how it is that you tackle kind of those pieces as time goes on.
Okay. Ryan had a question. Ryan said, great discussion. Thanks, Ryan. Regarding Avalara, is the subscription included with commonsku, or is it only the integration?
Just the integration. And that's a perfect example in terms of a time suck challenge. Taxes is just the complexity around that right now is unbelievable, and the amount of time people are spending kind of manually either are capturing that, remitting it. Avalara is a huge time saver from that perspective, but ultimately the potential risk that of not doing it properly in terms of
Laws are changing.
Penalties is the word I'm looking for.
Well, and the laws are changing so rapidly because of this change. And so what always sort of mortified me on the accounting side is we were shipping to every state. And we had every packages going everywhere. And so it always just worried me, because now you've got states making individual, obviously, decisions about taxes, and that's Avalara.
So if you have a system kind of working in the background that's counting your orders and counting your your revenue, then and can tell you when you're triggering Nexus, like those are the kinds of things that free up kind of mental space to work on more value add.
We have time for one more question I want to ask. I know this is a big worry as folks think about modernizing their tech stack. They might look at it and go, okay, I've got a great system here. I need to improve my marketing. I need to improve our order side of things. You have seen and onboarded and seen so many successful companies do this and make this transition. So whatever it is, the thing I want to help folks understand is speed, and making decisions quickly and moving on it is important. What have you seen on the other side with some of these companies that have made that decision? What are some of those comments they share with you in terms of ease, transition, and mostly what it did to empower their team?
I think that there's always, an element of kind of fear people feel around, change in general, or thinking that it's going to be such a huge amount of work, I don't have time. And that can be as simple as, getting a marketing system set up, or as complex as kind of a full workflow platform. And I think that when you're working with the right partner, and I'm not saying this about commonsku specifically, but in general, kind of when you've chosen kind of the right technology solution, you're working with the right partner, that they are there to help you kind of in that process, to be able to make it easy and to get you through to the other side, kind of in a way that that has everyone kind of feeling confident that they can do what they need to do and to be able to execute kind of effectively. And, the comment that we always hear kind of time and time again was, I wish I did this earlier. And, the number of people that have literally, come back to us like 6 years, I kid you not, kind of after 6 years and said, okay, I think I really need to do something now. It's like, can you imagine if you'd made that decision 6 years ago to improve the systems with how you're doing things, what the impact would have been on your business? So there's just like the opportunity cost of waiting is so massive. And so if you can just kind of recognize that, sure, change is hard, kind of, but if you're with the right partner, they make change easy. And that's the key part in terms of for any part of the tech stack that you're deciding upon.
Yeah, we'll end on that note. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. I know you're very busy. I know it's crazy. Business is crazy out there. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to join us. We will have this recorded so you can capture this and send it to other folks. Hi, Oscar in the background. And Catherine, I'm glad he made
held
an
off
appearance.
barking the whole time.
That's great. I love it. Catherine, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bobby. Bye, everybody.
All right.